everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our Zoom call. We're so excited that everyone is here today. I'm actually getting a lot of feedback from people who have been seeing these Zoom calls and been listening in. And I know I have a few families that are listening in today to just kind of understand when is it time for the placement of your loved one in a memory care. So I'm excited to have Jim here from TLC to tell us about his journey and when he had to make those tough decisions. How did it come about and the processing behind it. So we're so excited to have you here and to share part 2 of your story, Jim. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, and hello. I'm Dr. Jim Deitch, and our program today is the second in a series on Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And it's brought to you by TLC Services and our production partner, Senior Living Options. TLC Services stands for Transition Life Consultants. We are a group of 20+ professionally licensed and insured clinical social workers, psychologists, mental health professionals, marriage and family therapists. And what we do is give training seminars, we have support groups, and we do presentations like this, and of course the traditional one-on-one counseling. Well, more about TLC later at the end of our seminar today. Now let me point out that Senior Living Options assists senior members of our community find living situations that accommodate their physical, mental, and financial needs at no cost to them. And I want you to hear that, at no cost to you, okay? Very important. Well, today's presentation is focused to answer the question that every caregiver of a spouse or partner with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia asks. How will I know when it is time to place my spouse into memory care? Now, last week, we talked about the caregiver. Today, we're going to focus on the spouse, that is the person with Alzheimer's disease or other form of dementia. Now, before I begin to answer this question, let me tell you briefly who I am and a bit about myself. I'm Dr. James A. Deitch, and I've been a clinical social worker for over 60 years. I'm licensed in both Florida and Hawaii. I served as an Air Force clinical social worker and consultant to the Air Force Surgeon General for 23 years, and retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. I then taught for many years at the University of Hawaii, first in the School of Social Work and then in the school or the Department of Family and Consumer Sciences. That's home economics, fancied up. I moved to the villages with my wife of 53 years, Marcia, and my ever faithful canine companion, Honey Dog, in the summer of 2015. After my arrival, I joined TLC and now serve as its 501c4 organization's vice president. Now, last week I shared my backstory, my involvement with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I'll mention it briefly. Hopefully you'll go back and see part number 1. In 1987, my father-in-law, a wonderful, kind, generous man, came to live with us. Very, very soon, like within minutes, I discovered there was something wrong. And the wrong was that he had developed Alzheimer's disease. And for the next 2 years, my wife and I took care of him. It was easier for me because I got to run away to the university. But my wife, that was his daughter and only child, took on the responsibility of taking care of her father. And I will tell you, as any Alzheimer's caretaker can, it was a very, very interesting 2-year period. It almost ruined my wife's health. It certainly didn't do me any good. As an example, this man who I had adopted as my father after my own dad's passing would come and hit me and then accuse me of trying to steal his money. it wasn't a very fun time, but it was a growthful time, but not in the way I ever expected to grow. Now, let's go ahead 33 years later, and my wife Marcia developed dementia due to brain bleeds, which after half a year were terminated in the placement into a memory care facility. She fell and broke her hip on January the 10th, 2016. I remember the date. Well, we got her hospitalized, we got her operated on, and then 2 months later, she fell and broke her other hip. 2 months after that, she fell again, and this, of course, is due to the brain bleeds, and injured her back. What I learned is as she began decaying, I couldn't take care of her. There was just too much physical, too much mental problems, I guess you could say. And I realized that I needed a team to take care of this woman who I just very, very much loved. And I, as one person, am not a team. But the worst part of that 6 months was when, in June, the discharge planner, not a social worker, but some kind of a nurse, maybe an LPN. You know, these places do not hire the best. They hire the cheapest. And the laws in Florida are not very, very good, especially when it comes to discharge planning. I remember she coming into our room and she said, "Your wife is going to be discharged tomorrow." So what am I going to do? And she said, "You're going to take her home and you're going to give her 24-hour care. She can't be left alone." And at that moment, I knew I was in trouble. So I called up a friend, a social worker, whose husband was in a memory care placement, talked to her, went out, made a deal with the memory care place, talked to my insurance company, because I have long-term care insurance. I had it for her. I also have it for me. And within 2 days, I had made a placement. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Do not depend on the hospital or rehabilitation facility to help you with discharge planning. You got to do it yourself. And thank goodness we have Lisa coming up next week to tell us a bit more. Well, let's flash forward to January of this year. And what happened was I was invited to a respite program to talk about relaxation, and I did my thing, and they applauded, and everybody seemed to be happy. And then they asked a question that almost floored me. Now you got to know that my daughter, an Air Force bird colonel and PhD, and who was at the Pentagon, and now is at an assistant dean at the National Intelligence University, was sitting beside me. You see, I had brought my daughter to show off. Because that's what you do with your little girl. You know, you try and look important, or you kind of look competent. And I also know that she's setting counseling and guidance on her own just to have more ability to do her job. And the question that was asked of me was, "Doctor, you're the expert. How did you decide when it was time to place your wife into memory care?" And I realized I hadn't thought that through. The only thing I could say was I knew I couldn't take care of her. I knew a team effort was necessary, and I just was not a team. But it just came out. I knew I couldn't take care of her. Well, since that time, the coronavirus has come about, and I've had some time to do my professorial research, and I think I've come up with a model, a common sense model that social workers can use and people who are taking care of Alzheimer's or related dementia people can use. So why don't we go now and take a look at the first slide. Now, going back on my professorial person, I have learning objectives for everyone. So, first one, when you leave here today, I want you to know the factors strongly related to the decision that goes into placing one spouse into a memory care facility. And two, I want you to know that memory care placement is not abandonment, but an attempt to find a new balance for the marital relationship and an improvement in the level of care for one spouse. Next, please. This is the model that I came up with. It's a common sense model. It's a three-legged stool. And on one side, you have the caregiver, and we talked about the caregiver last time. And on the right side, you have the spouse with dementia and the community resources. Now, that's what we're going to work on today. But let me remind you that for the caregiver, what I said last time was that financial. Without money, you have a problem. Money is really very important. You got to know your budget and what you can afford in the way of placement. Mind. Even though the spouse has cognitive problems, I'm 83 years old. I know my mind is not as good as it was when I defended my dissertation over 50 years ago. I can't always remember as quickly as I did then. I remember during Vietnam, we had to make snap judgments about mental health of people. I was capable of doing it then. I don't know if I'm capable of that now. The body gets old. And I know for me, I have aches and pains in places that I never knew I had. Spirituality, and here I'm referring to, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, the spouse's spirituality, which as it declines with memory, it challenges one's own ability to believe in the goodness of a power greater than oneself. Family support. I find that kids have their own problems. And while you may be fortunate to have your spouse, your children come and help you, they really not necessarily want to be there. They have their own problems and they need to deal with their own families. And then I talked for a moment about early placement, that maybe it's another idea that we need to think about. Okay, so today we're moving on. Slide, please. Well, I did mention the population, and it's an older couple living together. They're retired. They have physical problems, more so with the person who's whatever stage of disease they're in. As with mental, the caretaker is in good shape, but the spouse is usually not. Finances are okay, at least they were until they hit this disease point. Extended family does not live here, or somewhere in New York, New Jersey, not in Florida. We all have friendly, supportive neighbors, but they have their own issues to take care of. And my sample really was the people that I have met in the villages. Okay, next. Now, to review this model that I've developed with three major classifications or legs: the caregiver, that's you; the spouse, our partner. And let me say there are many forms of partnership, and I may just say spouse, but I want you to know that I'm all inclusive of whatever the relationship is with the person who has Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. And of course, community resources, that's the local help available. Okay, now I've defined it, let's go on. Okay, factors to consider when deciding when to place. Mind, body, and spirit. Okay, spirituality is what I decided to call it. Did you know that according to some sources in the state of Florida, 60 to 80% of dementia cases in our state have been classified as Alzheimer's? So let me review for those of you who may not be really aware of the disease, but this is it in a nutshell. There's an early stage, that's the mild stage. And this is where the symptoms that people have are mild. And you need to consider yourself not so much as a caretaker, but as a care partner, okay? You're a care partner because your role is to support the person with the disease. And I'm going to tell you, this stage can last for years. It is not unusual for people to be in the early stage for 10 or more years. Why? Nobody knows. Next. Well, the middle stage, or the moderate stage. Now, when you reach this, kind of like my father-in-law, the person living with dementia would need a greater level of care, really, a greater level of care. And the caregiving becomes more difficult at that stage. It's not just more of the same, it's more difficult to take care of this person. And then, of course, there's a late stage, or the severe stage, and that usually requires intensive care. A memory facility type placement is good. And here, your role would be focusing on preserving the quality of one's life and dignity. That's important, quality and dignity for your spouse. Next, please. Well, I want you to take a look and watch your spouse's deterioration. You've got to know what's going on. Because as the spouse's mind deteriorates, problems increase and become worse. Now, I want you to look for the following behaviors, and they may grow worse. Is your spouse a danger to him or herself or others? Is there violence? Are they uncooperative? Do they become physical, disruptive, and verbally abusive? And I mentioned being hit and being accused of stealing my father-in-law's money. When in actuality, on one salary, I was supporting 5 adults. Is there confusion during the day? Are they hostile and disoriented after sundown? You've heard of sundowner syndrome? This is it. Do they wander around the house at night? Do they exit the house during the day or night? And are they losing or have they lost their ability to have reasonable, friendly conversations? And the last is a very important concept. Are they losing or have they lost control of their bladder and bowels? There are 2 reasons statistics show that people put their spouse into care. And that's because of, 1, their depression, because taking care of a person with Alzheimer's is depressing. And that's normal and natural. You just don't want to get too depressed. And of course, the second reason is a loss of bladder and bowel control. And that's very messy and it stinks up the house. And there's no one at fault. It's just part of the decompensation of your loved one. So as these elements deteriorate, that's when you need to be thinking more and more about placement. Next, please. Now we have a thing called activities of daily living. And these are the activities that are all necessary for us. Eating. Have they stopped eating? Bathing. Dressing. Toileting. And then we go back to transferring. Getting the person from point A to point B, from their room to where they eat, from the room to the bath, getting dressed, getting onto the toilet on time, getting from your house into a car to go to the doctor. These are all transferring. And when you are unable to help your spouse transfer at a certain level of deterioration, it takes a team. It's more than one person to give adequate care to one spouse. One person can't do it all. And although we think we can, after a while, we have to admit we're not a team. We're just one loving person. We need help. Next. Spirituality is very interesting. And I'll just kind of quote from what I wrote here. Those spouses who are unable to hold on to their religious practices and spiritual beliefs due to cognitive deterioration may no longer present a positive outlook toward their struggles with memory loss. Now, this is awful in and of itself, but the loss of one's spirituality may have a seriously detrimental effect on the caregiver. You know, we don't live in a vacuum. Everything that happens to our spouse happens to us, either in a lesser or greater format. Next. Let's now look at the community resources. That's the local help available. You know, most Americans have good medical care, and should problems arise, you know, we are able to go to a doctor or other health provider. But what happens if you live somewhere where you can't get that good medical care? Maybe it could be because there are no medical care facilities around or available. Or it could be you just can't transfer your spouse to the car. Think of this. We have a woman who's 105 pounds. We have her husband who's lost weight and is down to 160 pounds. And by the third stage, this is dead weight. How does she, without hurting her body, move that human being from the house into a wheelchair and into the car? I know of several women who have injured their backs trying to move their man who is just too heavy for their bone structure. Think about that. There are daycare and planned respite programs. Anyone caring for a person with dementia, no less Alzheimer's, needs short-term or time-limited breaks. And I've been told these breaks are life-saving. I found the breaks that I was able to take with my father-in-law and my wife were life-saving. It was important to not have to be there all the time. Now, these respite programs support and maintain the primary caregiving relationship. You know, even when your spouse is healthy, think of us during this Corona-19 environment. Some women are saying, I wish my husband would just get out of the house. And I'm sure the husbands are saying, I want to get out of the house. Enough is enough. So we need to be able to have one-on-one time with ourselves, okay? It's really important. And you need to know that these respite care programs provide a positive experience for the person receiving the help. And that should these programs not be available, the lack of them can be devastating to all parties. And let me talk a minute about local hires. Maybe you can get someone to come in and help you out. That's important. And good care is awfully hard to find. But what do you do when you need respite care and your local hire calls you and says her kids are sick and she has to stay home and take care of them? Remember, your spouse is not the local hire's primary person. Their own family is primary to them. So there are times, and probably a lot of inconvenient times, when you do not have that service, if you can afford it in the first place. Next, please. I mentioned full-time early placement because think about this, gang. How cruel is it to place your spouse, without you, into a new living environment after their memory has significantly deteriorated? How would you like to be thrown onto a desert island and you don't know how to really fend for yourself? And there, you are supposed to survive. That's scary. I think it's cruel that we sometimes are forced to do this, but when it's not necessary, it is cruel to place your spouse in an environment where they cannot manage because they have significantly deteriorated. So I have a couple of ideas. What about a couple going into assisted living together? And as part of the assisted living together, you get memory care help, and you get to explore what the memory care facility looks like. So when there's need for that transition, your spouse has already been there. This is not a desert island to them. That's a place that they know about. And as for many decisions, finances are a key. And next week, of course, Lisa Honka in part 3 will talk about that. So my thought is, let's not be cruel. Let's maybe think about or get ourselves into an assisted living situation when we know that memory care is inevitable. Next. Well, today we talked about mind as the mind of your spouse, the person with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia deteriorate. It gets more and more difficult, not just for you, but for them. And as their bodies, as your body gets old and you have a hard time taking care of that person, that's more good reason to think about memory care. And of course, spirituality, once that's lost, you lose a whole lot of really who you are. Medical care, hopefully is available to you. If it's not available to you, you need to make some kind of change so that you can get yourself, as you grow old, and your spouse into proper care, or at least be seen by a physician every so often. Respite programs are good for your own sanity. Try them out and have fun with them. And local hires, well, those are good people, but be aware that they have other priorities other than you. Next slide. Oh, and here's something I have to give every time because it's so important. You, caregiver, take care of yourself first. If you become ill or debilitated, both you and your spouse are in deep trouble. Who's going to take care of you should you become debilitated? Who's going to take care of your spouse should you become debilitated? And I heard the other day that 60%, maybe 65% of caregivers die before their ill spouse. And that's because caregiving is really very, very stressful. So remember that. You have a greater chance of dying before your ill spouse. So take care of yourself in mind, body, and spirituality. And to do that is never selfish. It's your duty. Slide. And thank you very, very much. Oh, in my, let me give you this one. This is in my appendix here. I was doing some philosophical thinking one day, so I had to write it down. Does my spouse have Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia? Or does Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia have my spouse? Or said another way, does my spouse have the disease or does the disease have my spouse? Philosophical, but it's worth thinking about. Well, with that, I will say thank you for sharing your time with me. I know your time is very, very valuable. So I'm extremely grateful and I appreciate you being here. And I guess I'll be open for questions if someone happens to have any or one or whatever.
Jim, I'd like to ask you a question. I meet with a lot of families, and what I find is sometimes they don't take care of themselves, right? You're so busy in the trenches taking care of the loved one that has memory loss. So how do you take care of yourself as a caregiver? Can you give us some suggestions on things that you did?
Thank you for that one. In fact, I wrote some down. Can we go back to the slide in the appendix? And the next one. Oh, here it is. Oh, how to take care of yourself. I put some stuff down here, okay? First, ask for help when you need it. You know, those of us who are too proud, we get ourselves into trouble. It's really healthy to ask for help when you need it. And you reach out for your friends. And this is when you find out who is a real friend and who's a fair weather friend. But your real friends will be there for you. Some a whole lot and some not quite so much. But that's okay. Join a caregiver support group. You'll find that in the villages, there are a whole lot of support groups for Alzheimer's patients and people with other dementia, though Alzheimer's seems to be the focus in the villages. But join a care support group, you know, find out that you're not the only one having this problem, and maybe someone, whatever the question you might have, maybe have solved it. Well, take a break. No, take breaks each day, okay? Take breaks each day. Keep up with your hobbies and interests. You know, hobbies make life fun, and you still have to have fun, even though you have responsibilities. Eat healthy foods. So many people would just grab garbage. Although I'm going to McDonald's, I realize that that's not the healthiest food for me in the world. Although sometimes I will splurge and go, I'm talking about most of the time when I eat, I try to eat healthy foods. You got to stay healthy. Get exercise as often as you can. On the television today, they were saying that if you can't get in 10,000 steps, 7,500 steps a day would do the job. 10,000 is better, 7,500 is okay. See your medical professional on a usual basis. You know, waiting to see the doctor when you only have a problem may save some money, but you know what? Social Security is there for we old timers, and they'll accept your Social Security and your primary and your secondary insurance. So keep your body in good shape. Take preventative care. Now, see your financial advisor on a regular basis. Remember, money is really, really important. And the more you have, the better off you are. And keep your health and legal and financial information up to date, including your medications. That's really important because every time I go to a doctor, they want to see what pills I'm taking. Now I try and take as few as possible, but they'll want to see what they are and how many there are. So those are a number of things that I've thought of. I'm sure there are other lists. It's important to take care of yourself. And I think the first thing, you got to ask for help, at least in the beginning when you don't know quite what you're doing. Okay, thank you. Lisa, thank you. That's a great question.
You know, one of the things too that I find with families is just a roadmap, right? Years before you have to make a decision about even getting in-home care. First, when you get the diagnosis, are you going to look for in-home care through your long-term care insurance? Are you going to start to look at support groups like you mentioned? Sometimes people are even sharing spouses, right? So you're going to be watching someone's spouse while the other one's maybe taking a break to go to a doctor's office. I find that that helps people too, just to kind of bond with someone else who's going through the same journey, but also working with your children on a plan, right? What do they think are options? Sometimes you have to have the children's buy-in to this plan that you might have down the road. Sometimes children or even brothers and sisters of your loved one may be opposed to it. So sometimes educating them on what your plan is, that your long-term care was purchased for this exact reason, right? And so really just figuring out medically, financially, emotionally, what are the stepping stones towards maybe an end goal. And it doesn't have to be something permanent like placement. It could be in-home care, it could be respite, it could be day programs. Things change so quickly with someone with memory care that you think you have a plan and then suddenly life throws you a curve. They end up in the hospital and then they have a fall and you're quickly trying to make decisions. So it's good to, when you first get the diagnosis, just begin to start thinking about the plan and getting a roadmap to possible outcomes for later, even though it's years in advance. It's good to have a plan.
Well said, well said.
Yeah, so that's what I do. I work with families all the time who are during this journey, just making a plan. I had a woman call me this morning, breathless, and she said, I had your card for about 3 months. A neighbor of a neighbor gave me your card, and I think it's time. And I said, well, when do you want to meet? And she said, in a couple weeks. I said, how about Sunday when your son is available, who lives here in the Villages too? And she said, absolutely, that'd be perfect. She said, but I'm worried about the roofer because I'm trying to get the roof done. And I said, you know what? I'm not worried about the roofer. I can walk a couple houses to your house if the roofer's there. But I think, you know, when I hear someone breathless on the phone and she said, my husband's in late stages of Alzheimer's, it's when you need help, right? You need a plan. And we need to have the children involved who are here to help with this because she's exhausted. I can hear it in her voice. So again, you don't want to go it alone. And that's where, again, I think the videos that you've offered us, these Zoom chats, have been helpful because you're laying out your journey. And I appreciate that. And some of the decisions that you had to make coming to that, right? And you never want to be thrown a curveball by a social worker who says, tomorrow's discharge day, right? And you have to be scrambling.
I don't think a social worker would do that. This was an LPN, I'm positive. I don't even think she was an RN. But these facilities, Lisa, they do not hire social workers because they have to put out a little more money, according to fair labor laws.
Yes.
Well, guess what? So they hire the cheapest one available. And these people have good hearts.
Yes.
But it doesn't beat the years of training that we've had to work with people.
Yeah.
Or even
And
a
I
young,
think, yeah, I also think they don't know the resources. I often work with families who say, well, my loved one needs to go to a long-term care facility. And when I start to dig a little bit deeper, I say, well, why do you say that? Well, the person's a one-person assist. Well, that's what assisted livings do. And in the state of Florida, different memory cares, different assisted livings can do different things. So often people are paying $8, $10, $12,000 a month for a long-term care facility when they could be paying $3 or $4 or $5,000 for a memory care or assisted living memory care. It's unfortunately, even the people that we turn to, the experts in the rehabs, are not totally aware of what each community can do in the area. And it's a big disservice to the villagers not to really know the resources. They don't tour, they don't have their brochures in front of them, they haven't done the research. They just say, well, it's up to you to decide where, but I think long-term care skilled is where they need to go. And that's really unfortunate. Or they give them, two options, and unfortunately, they may not have an executive director there or a health and wellness director. So again, I'm always aware of what's going on in every single community so I can help navigate for people. It's a very tricky situation, and sometimes we have time, and sometimes we have no time. So I appreciate your story and how difficult it must have been, the multiple hospitalizations, rehab stays for you.
it wasn't easy, and I understand what others are going through. And I think that was the reason why I decided to study and write this, because you have to make a decision. And this is a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And every social worker, I think, who is involved with, or any professional who's involved, if they just take a look at my very simple model, they'll be able to get the process started. And the process really has to begin with the caregiver. That's the person that's really important and who needs to think things through. And we support them. And we're very fortunate, I should say. We're very fortunate to have you, Lisa. And I thank you for being with us. And your presentation next week, I'm looking forward to.
Thank you. Well, I've done the presentation many times to different communities, and I think a lot of times people don't realize how much research goes into just, again, defining who is a caregiver, the caregiver burnout, and what are the different stages, again, of memory loss and when people need to start making the plans. So figuring out, medically, financially, socially, what do people need? So I'm looking forward to sharing just a little bit of information with you on what goes into a decision and what resources are out there. So again, as you meet somebody, what options are out there for people. So yeah, and I think caregiver burnout, we're seeing, as you went through, it's a hard decision, and caregiver burnout is something I see every single day, people that are really melting down. I had for instance, last week, a family called me and said, I've been working with them for about 1.5 years, trying to convince the POA up in Michigan, it's time for your loved one down here to make that transition to memory care. Well, it had to end in a emergency room visit to get her hand stitched up because she had picked up glass and there was blood all over the kitchen, all over the neighbor's house, the yard. And she said, I think it's time for us to make a move. And I said, I do too. I think she's not safe at home. And so we ended up moving her to a assisted living because she needed support around her. And as I was packing up this woman to get her moved, I was helping the neighbor walk me through the house, and we were looking for furniture. And it turned out this woman had no toothpaste, no shampoo, no soap. She, when I looked in the refrigerator to take snacks to the assisted living, there was no food in the freezer, and the only food she had in the refrigerator was cans of coffee. And I said, wow. it profoundly moved me because I couldn't move the power of attorney out of state to realize how in danger she was, right? How much her life had gotten so small here in the villages. And the neighbors were enabling her to stay in the house and to bring her meals. And the neighbors, when I went through the house, was picking up things. They said, well, we just never realized she started to smell and she started to look a little different. But as we were buying groceries for her, we never thought to buy her shampoo or toothpaste or toothbrush or bar of soap. And I thought, wow, sometimes we don't dig down that deep. And I think forever she will have changed my life because I can't get my message out fast enough, right? Or find the right words. I had worked with this woman for 1.5 years to try to get her loved one to move to assisted living. And soon after she moved, so she moved last Thursday, I got a call over the weekend from the executive director who said she's actually gone out to the parking lot looking for her car and she hasn't driven in 7 years. So we're moving her now to memory care. And I said, does she remember her neighbors who've been helping her for the 10 years that she's lived here? She said she doesn't know their names.
Yeah.
And I thought, I took my breath away, right? Because some people just, the journey is so difficult, you don't really realize what you're in the middle of. And the neighbors kept saying, this just happened so fast. And I said, I know it feels like that, but you've been watching her change significantly over time. And now we have a crisis, right? Her hands are bloody. She's taking out the stitches that she has in her hands. She doesn't understand what they're for. We've got to move her to a safe environment so someone can look at her wounds, right? And make sure she's getting meals and she's getting her antibiotic because she doesn't know how to take it. And then when we dug a little deeper in the house, that memory loss was everywhere. But if you only looked in the right places, right? The woman was sleeping in her garage. She was no longer really even in her house. And even when we went to pack up her clothes, there was nothing in the drawers in her dresser or her nightstands. It took my breath away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so memory loss can look okay. Sometimes on the outside, people seem just a little bit confused or they're not driving. And lucky your wife had you to navigate, right? But so many people here in the villages have loved ones, children, family, brothers, sisters out of state. And the people here sometimes that are helping to care for them are the neighbors, and they don't quite see the whole picture.
That's right. And let me add to that. I mentioned this last time. A lot of people who are living together in the villages that love each other, they're life partners, are not legally married and to each other. And therefore, when one person becomes unable to think for themselves, the other person does not have any legal authority to help them out.
Right.
To sign them into the hospital or to find memory care for them or to help them deal with their finances. So I always say, if you're with somebody and you're not legally married, go see an attorney and get some paperwork done so that no disaster happens.
Right. Well, some of the things that I work on too is where are the adult children, right? Are there adult children who are really going to navigate for mom or for dad? Or is there a brother or a sister or a niece who's really going to navigate for that person? It's okay, of course, to have this life partner go to care meetings, but sometimes it's the adult children who have the power. And so as I interview people, I always say, so who's your power of attorney? Who's your health surrogate, right? Is it a child out of state? When was the last time you did your legal papers? Are they up to date? Do you still have these children? Are they still these children that you believe are responsible? Are they still responsible? Or are their spouses not so responsible and maybe you want to change things? So again, trying to figure out who the power is, right? Who the health surrogate is. And if you do have a life partner, what part of that journey do you want to share with that life partner, and are the children okay with that partner, right? Because sometimes when money is involved, or large sums of money, sometimes you just have to be real careful who you're dealing with. I have a family right now I'm working with. The girlfriend is phenomenal. She knows everything inside and out, and she really is phenomenal. And the adult daughter is really struggling with just putting all the pieces together for the move-in for dad. And so I'm trying to make sure that the daughter, who has the power, is involved with everything, and she understands where we're at, but I need to go slower and explain things for her, where the girlfriend, who's 25 years older, she got it. You know, she's running with everything, but she doesn't have the power. The power was given to the daughter long ago. So it's trying to figure out who has the power to make decisions, who is able to hear messages, right? Because sometimes things are private, and sometimes there's a great deal of money, and sometimes there is no money, and you have to figure out, again, money sometimes is the driver, and sometimes care is the driver for the next step for families.
Thank you very much. Yes,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, all right. Does anybody here have any questions? Do our audience have any questions? Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, these are going to be on your website, the TLC website. They'll also be on my website. So if anybody is interested in hearing about our last Zoom calls that we've done for the last 2 months, they will be posted, and people can certainly find out more about what I do and what TLC does. Do you want to just finish up with this slide, Jim, and then I'll take it from there?
Well, yes. I want to tell everyone that the services offered by TLC are free. It doesn't cost you anything. However, it does take some money to run the services that we do give. For instance, if we want to get on Zoom and do groups, that's going to cost money. If you want paper, if you want to have a ink, whatever it takes to run an organization, it does take money. So we do appreciate donations. And of course, we'd like for you to visit our website, no matter what. It's tlc-services.org. Remember, that's a .org. Or you might just want to call 352-322-0576 and talk to, most likely Pat will pick up the phone. We appreciate you calling. Just remember that we care. Thank you.
And again, if anyone would like any information about senior living options, my name is Lisa Honka, and I am the owner of Your Key to Senior Living Options. I'm here in the Villages. I've been a senior living advisor for 10 years, and in the last 4 years that I've had my company, I've helped over 1,000 families. My services are completely free. I work with over 60 communities in and around the area of Florida, and then I can also go nationally to find communities in other states for families and resources. And I have about 250 referral sources that know what I do and refer to me. So again, my services are free. I'm happy to meet with anybody to discuss their long-term care insurance, to help them with VA and attendance benefits, to look at senior living options, respites. Again, I'm here as a resource if people want to get in-home care or just make a plan. I'm here to help people, and I will meet you virtually, or I can meet you at a safe environment. So everybody right now during coronavirus, stay safe, right? If they have any questions, certainly reach out to me. And if they want to get any more information on either TLC or myself, certainly reach out to us. And my ad is always in the Sunday paper. So if you're looking for my information, it's there, and I can certainly point you in the right direction for resources. Thanks again, and everybody have a safe week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.